Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar today. We have participants from over 20 countries, so we look forward to a very lively, interactive discussion with you all this morning. So welcome.
Sorry, John, I think people are still coming in, so I think we could give them a couple of minutes.
Okay. Yeah, we could. Yeah, no problem.
I love you for being timely, but really, we still have people coming in.
That's the British side of me there, I think. So let's, yeah.
So we did forgot to check that all our computers are showing the same accurate time according to the atomic clock somewhere, wherever that is. So not sure, but so we'll just wait another minute or two until we see that people stop coming in before we start. So I think it has slowed down, at least in the door.
So, okay. Well, for those of you who just arrived, good morning and welcome to the webinar. As I mentioned, we are lucky enough to have registered participants from over 20 different countries today. So it does set well for a very lively and interactive discussion. My name is John Switters, and I'm a European project manager at Funka. Now, before we actually get going today, we just have some housekeeping for you that we would like to go through. Now, this webinar will be recorded and published on our website, on the Funka website. If you do have any questions that you would like to ask our speakers, then please use the Q&A function that you'll find just at the bottom of your screen, and you can pose your question there. Your camera and your microphone are actually disabled, so please use the raised hand function if you prefer to ask your question verbally, so that's also possible. Now, in this webinar, we are using automatic captioning. Now, we know that they can never be as accurate as live captioning, but based on the user testing we have carried out and the recommendations from the hard of hearing organizations that we work with, we like to promote the use of automated captions. It's a very good way to show the importance of accessibility for free. And now when you use automatic captions in meetings and webinars, the system actually improves from machine learning. In less widely used languages, there is less data available. So the actual quality may be lower. However, this is changing and we are seeing improvements. I think we should remember that about 5% of the population suffers from disabled hearing loss, disabling hearing loss, apologies. And in the age group over 60, about a fourth of the population is affected. So if we move on, and now we've got the housekeeping out of the way, we can start the presentation. So again, welcome. Before we get going with the content, I just wanted to remind you also, if you have any questions after the event today and you'd like to get in touch with the team, please reach out to us to the email address you can see on the screen, which is research@funka.com, and we'll endeavour to get back to you as soon as possible. Okay, so now let's take a look at what we'll be covering today. So we have the welcome and the housekeeping, which is essential in all of our webinars. Then we'll be having a look at accessibility, so covering a brief introduction to accessibility as a topic. We'll then be looking at two groundbreaking EU-funded projects, which is the Cluster and the FEED project. Then we'll have a kind of a short period there for you to launch your questions about the presentation on the two projects. We'll then have a brief coffee break where you can stand up, stretch your legs, grab a quick coffee before coming back and really looking at the user scenarios and how these projects and the results of these projects have an impact in real life. And then finally, we'll end on another question and answer session just to make sure we cover any doubts you may have. Next slide, please. Yeah, today's speakers, as I've already said, I'm one of them, so welcome. We also have with us today Susanna Laurin, who is the Chief Research and Innovation Officer at Funka. And we also are lucky to have with us today Peter Kameni, who is a project manager. So without further ado, I would like to hand the floor over to Susanna Laurin, who will start her presentation with a brief overview of accessibility. Thank you, Susanna.
Thank you, John. I can hear that you're starting to practice your Swedish. You're pronouncing my name in another way, but we get back to that later. So, hello everyone, good to see you here this lovely day. At least in Sweden we have a fantastic sunshine, so I'm impressed by everyone that's indoors. And I just want to start with presenting the company Funka a little bit for some of you that may not be that known to our business. We are accessibility consultants and we do a lot of research and innovation, so that's the department that I am heading, where we do European projects and national innovation projects as well. We have a very close collaboration to the disability movement since we were once started by the disability organizations in Sweden. We still keep that going and do a lot of projects also with these organizations. We do perform a lot of strategic consulting for the European Commission and national governments and monitoring bodies, mostly on legislation and standardization and that kind of things, but we really have a position of trust where we also support in policy work and such things. And of course, we are also involved in standardization, even if that is something that is usually seen as maybe not so exciting for everyone. A sure way to put family asleep and lose friends is how we define it in the business, but standards are really important for making sure that accessibility works in a good way. So standards are key to our businesses. But we also have a department that is kind of the ordinary consultancy business, and that's actually 80% of our business, our consultancy. So we develop websites and systems that work for everyone with guaranteed accessibility. We do audits, testing, support, all the things that guiding and recommendations that the accessibility business is full of and what we may be more or most known for. And we also do a lot of training. And this is very sort of schematic. I would say that training is part of everything we do, because so far I've been doing this for more than 20 years and we haven't met anyone who provides something inaccessible because they are evil. And that's always a question of not knowing really, and not having the knowledge or awareness about accessibility. That's why things still keep being not accessible. So training is a very essential part of what we do. And also, of course, webinars and presentations like this and workshops. So that's a little bit about us. And our definition of sort of the goal of what we want to achieve, the digital accessibility, is when every individual, no matter of ability, can reach and use digital services. So when we reach that goal, then we can all retire. So I look forward to that day, but it hasn't happened yet. But we aim for it still. So today we are going to talk about authoring tools. So why is this important and what's the real problem here? I mean, we have new legislation covering the public sector, and now soon we all have also parts of the commercial sector, and still we think that even more needs to be done. So what is the actual problem? Well, One way of putting it is that our research shows that around 50% of accessibility problems are created by the web authors. Again, not because they are evil, but because many of the people who are creating content are not trained in accessibility. Some of them are not even trained as communication officers. So in many, specifically in local governments, in many of the markets we work, there can be 200 or 500 people who are allowed to create content, even if that is not their real profession. They are still also, they are doing something, something else they are experts on, but they are also required to, or they are supposed to publish content online. And if you do that not every day, not every week, maybe once a month, then of course you forget how to do it in an accessible way. So it's kind of impossible to make sure that all these people understand and remember accessibility. This means that there is an enormous demand for training. We have approximately 7 million-ish interfaces covered by the Web Accessibility Directive alone. And we are not really sure how many web authors are out there. I don't think anyone knows, but based on the statistics we have from the market where we are active, which is mostly in the western part of Europe, we believe that there could be maybe on average at least 20 or 40 web authors per organization, might be more, times 7 million. No matter where you start, the calculation is kind of impressive. There's a lot of people publishing out online. So even if we like to train people, and that's one of the things we do for a living, that just won't scale. So something else needs to be done if we are ever going to overcome the gap when it comes to web accessibility. So that's why we, and I'm sure many others have also thought about this, but what if the authoring tools, so the tools made for creating content, if they could provide accessibility by default, built in from the start, so that none of us would sort of make things inaccessible. The tools themselves would make it accessible from the start. And if that is too ambitious or not possible from some kind of technical reason, then maybe the tools could at least support the authors in a better way than is done today. This is something that would be worth research and investigating. So we were lucky enough to get 2 research projects funded in the same time. So we have kind of 2 sister projects here. One of them is called FEAT, where we have created ready-to-use templates. So we are using one authoring tool as a model, and then we are trying to provide templates with accessibility features that can be used in any other authoring tool. The other project called Cluster is where we have created accessibility features in more like a repository of best practices that then can be implemented in any authoring tool on the market. So I'm trying to do a short presentation of both these projects, and I know I don't have much time, so I will try to keep within my time. So these both projects were funded by the European Commission, and they are running in parallel, and they both end in July, when we will be out sailing and doing other nice things. So we are really now in the ending phase of this, and this is why we also have a series of demonstration events. So the first one is called Features for Accessibility Through Templates, or FEAT for short. In this project, we want to provide hands-on solutions with accessibility by default. So really built in, something that is accessible from the start, and you don't have to do anything to make it accessible. It's just there, it just works. The pressure is taken out of any web author, and the web author doesn't have to be an expert in accessibility. We have kind of invisible things. So the templates are just accessible from the start, but we also have some parts where we can't make everything automatic. We need, of course, to let the web author also decide on some things and have flexibility. And that's where we added the built-in support. So either it's completely automatic, or the tool will hold your hand and make sure that you move in the right direction and support you through the accessible content creation. We are using, as I said, a model for this, and we are using the authoring tool Episerver, which is a Swedish company, or originally a Swedish company, now owned from the US. And that is a very strong, has a very strong market part in the Nordics, but also in other parts of Europe. And this is very common, that the authoring tools are quite regional or local. So if you look at the different parts of Europe, you can see that some tools are very, very popular in the south and some other in the east and so on. So this is one of the northern ones. It's not better or worse than any of the other tools, but it's a tool that we happen to know a lot from the start, because we have been working with it sort of from the inside, on the back office side. So it was a good example for us to work with. And also we know that Episerver is also interested in accessibility and would like to promote this. So we are using Episerver as the model, creating templates that is supposed to stimulate the market, so that any other authoring tool that is based on templates can use it quite easily, and authoring tools that are based on other ways of providing content can also use the specific features. So you can pick and choose the parts of the templates that you would like to implement in your own tool. During this whole project, we have had a user-centric approach that we always have, but in this case, it has been even more important than ever, because the end result is supposed to support the web author. So of course, we need to make sure that that is what it actually does. And both of these projects are also based on a pilot project that we did before, where we looked into which authoring tools were most popular, and we had a lot of discussions with web authors already in 2018. So in the FEED project, we started out with surveys asking web authors about their authoring capacities. We made interviews, in-depth interviews with web authors on different levels. And then we built a test environment. So not a prototype, but a real test environment in Episerver, where we could try out all the different features that we wanted to present. We then created user scenarios based on what the web authors told us were most important for them. And we did some piloting before we moved on to the real user testing, inviting people to do user tests and answer also a survey. And also we made interviews after this whole part of the project was done. So we have been doing iterations all the time and making sure that the web author input has been contributing actively to the agile process we have had in the development of this. So it has been a very interesting journey, of course, for us, but also very rewarding to work with web authors who have been contributing a lot to the knowledge of this project and the results. So the selection criteria we used for understanding or choosing which templates or which features to create were the frequency of use. We wanted to make sure that the templates that we are providing are often used, and that they also cover things that we know often fail. So when we put our other hat on and we are auditors and testers, we look from the outside and see that these features are often contain accessibility problems. Then we looked at the technical feasibility. Of course, we need to be able to actually fix this. Not everything is done in the template. Some are in the editor or in the framework of the or the core of the actual tool. So we can't fix everything in a project that is only doing templates, but we need to make sure that we do where the templates is most important. And then we also chose from what the web authors perceived was most difficult. So where they thought making things accessible is most difficult to do. That's of course important. And the end users, we don't want to fix things that are not really disturbing the end users that much, but we wanted to focus on the most important things from the end user perspective. And then what I think is most cool with this project is that we did the user testing in real life settings. So we invited Episerver users, authors today that work in Episerver, and Episerver has during the course of this project changed name into Optimizely, but I will never learn that, so I keep calling them Episerver. We started with an interview, and then we let the authors who wanted to participate in this create actual content. So they built or developed, they built content into a real Episerver environment, so that we created kind of small websites in this. So this is not prototyping, it's not your ordinary user testing, this is very close to reality. And then they also answered questions in a survey after the testing so that we could see if they liked them or not. And we had a very positive response. So the features that we selected based on these criteria and the user testing done is the framework, the starting page, the article page, the calendar event page, the calendar listing block, the page listing block, the text block, image, forms, and video block. So these are the 10 features that we provide in this as the result of this project, and that are now accessible by default and free for anyone to use. And I'll get back to where you can find them in a little while. So then the second project is the We4Authors cluster, where we looked at the most used authoring tools in the public sector in Europe. They all have different approaches, but they have common challenges. So from an accessibility standpoint, they are more or less the same, or many of them are very similar at least. And we thought if we could get all of these tools to work together, or many of them, then there should be a joint potential of sharing knowledge and making sure that we can do something that is good for the whole market, so to speak. So that was the idea behind the cluster project. So we created a cluster from market players like Drupal, Joomla, Umbraco, Plone, Sitevision, and even TinyMCE, which is not an authoring tool, but one of the biggest editors in the world. And together with the International Association of Accessibility Professionals also, and Funka as a leader, we created this cluster aiming to solve some of the accessibility problems in authoring tools together. Very, very interesting project as well. Very rewarding to work with different market players and hear how generous they are and what a good result comes out of people working together. Really, really interesting to have a group of this super high level technical people who knows everything about authoring tools and can work jointly to solve problems. That has been extremely fun for us. So in this project, we looked at the user needs and the technical feasibility. So what are the common problems or the most pressing problems from an authoring tool, from an author perspective, kind of generically over any tool, no matter if it's licensed or open source or what programming language they use. So what are the most pressing problems and how can we solve it on a kind of generic level? We also looked at what is already out there. If somebody knew that another tool or one of the tools in the group already had a good solution, then we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We looked at it and we thought maybe we can improve it even more, or we can do more with it. And then we did loads of testing, because for these market players, the biggest, I think, reason for them to join the cluster in the beginning was that they would have time to do testing and they would have the possibilities that we can provide with all these users and all the testing procedures, because that is not what they usually have resources to do in their ordinary development cycles. So a lot of focus on testing in this project as well. And after the testing, we started collecting the recommendations and saying that these are the features that we believe should be included in all authoring tools. And of course, again, here is it's important to cover something that is not very specific to one tool, but that can be used by the whole market. So more than 100 web authors participated in our tests, and both in this project and the FEAT project, the tests are like an hour or an hour and a half long. So these are really, people are really engaged and in this project. So we are very thankful for that. We had participation from more than 20 countries, most of Europe and also the US and Canada and some, I think, from Australia as well, and Japan. And we understood quite quickly that the people who are signing up for the tests, they are more than averagely interested in accessibility. Otherwise, we wouldn't reach them, because, I mean, we couldn't we probably don't have the contact information to authors that are absolutely not interested in accessibility at all. Or if they would see our newsletter or our sendouts, they wouldn't respond because they wouldn't be interested. So probably the authors testing here are not kind of the average web author, but people who are a little bit more interested in average. And to mitigate that, we also carried out workshops where we made sure to involve and include also web authors who had no idea about web accessibility before. And that was also very, very, very interesting discussions, who also helped us to make sure that the features, recommendations for features that we provide in the project has been also having that perspective. So in the cluster project, we have also provided 10 features, and we have selected the tables creator, a change language option, a forms editor, the alternative text description, of course, everyone knows that, the video, and then, so these 5 are the more technical ones. And then we have another set of 5 features that are more maybe supportive in character. So we have one feature on documentation. We saw that the authors really need to understand accessibility and what their tools can do when it comes to accessibility. So we have a documentation feature, and then we have 4 different kinds of testing features. So built-in testing into the tool. You can have automatic testing while editing, so kind of live testing, and then testing of the full page. So when you have created all your content, you can test the full page before you publish it. And we have also a feature where you test the whole website. So maybe not the specific web author, but the whole, the website owner can do that to see where in the team more training is needed and so on. And also testing of documents, because as you may know, documents are really where most organizations have problems today with the accessibility. So these are the features that we selected for the cluster project. And the results of these 2 projects are free for everyone to use, and they will soon be online. Some of it is already online, and the rest will come soon because the projects are ending in July, as I mentioned. And this is kind of a sneak peek view. And in the FEAT project, we are providing technical specifications and guidelines so that not only Episerver partners and clients can use the templates, but also other tool makers. The code of the templates will be published on Marketplace and Foundation. Both of these are Episerver specific repositories where you can download the templates if you are an Episerver partner. We are also presenting the code in Bitbucket so that anyone can use it. And right now we have the description of the demonstration of this on the funka.com/feat website, where we have, that is the demonstration website where we present the features and where you can have a look at it and understand how it works. But the actual download will be finalized in shortly because there is a qualification process, validation process within Episerver that we are waiting for. For the cluster results, we are providing technical specifications and guidelines again. We have also done videos. You will see a short part of that video later today, and screen recordings. So videos showing the end user perspective and the actual coding, and also web authors explaining what the problem is and so on, and then a screen recording of what the solution is doing. And you will find all of this very soon on the project website, which is accessibilitycluster.com. So accessibilitycluster in one word.com. So I think that is what I had. Yes. John, you look like you want to say something.
Yes, no, I wanted to say thank you very much, Susanna, well, for being on time, so on time to the minute. So thank you very much for that. And I think the results of these projects will no doubt help web authors to generate accessible content in a far easier way. So thank you very much for that. We do have some questions from the audience. So I'd like to go through those with you, Susanna, if that's possible. But just before we start, I would like to encourage anyone who has a question, doubt, to use the Q&A function. Please don't be shy. We would like this to be as interactive as possible, and we would like to hear from you. So please do reach out. So Susanna, the first question that we have is, how much does my supplier need to understand about accessibility to be able to implement the templates that you've just described in my organization?
Oh, that's a good one. Thank you for that question. I will need to answer a little bit like a politician, unfortunately, but it depends. But the idea with the templates of FEAT is that the supplier doesn't have to know anything. We are not only helping the web authors with the templates, but we are also making sure that the suppliers do not have to be accessibility experts. That's one of the really benefits of that project. That said, whenever anyone is taking code from one place and implementing it somewhere else, things may happen. So if your supplier is, well, I can't guarantee that it will be smooth, but the idea is that it should be kind of, you take this package and you just implement it and it should work. That's one of the things we want to avoid, that you are kind of dependent on your supplier. So it should work, and if you would have any problems, then please reach out. We will be happy to support you, of course, and your supplier. We want this to be used, so yeah. But they shouldn't need to be accessibility experts. I would say they would need to be a little bit interested, maybe, to make sure that it becomes as good as possible.
Thank you very much. Let's jump into the second question that we have here, which is, did you look at the actual accessibility of the tools themselves during these projects? Yeah,
I think that means sort of the publishing, when you are actually creating the content and publishing yourself. So if the web author has a disability, that's how I understand the question. Yes, we did. That is part of both of these projects. It's not the main focus, but it's definitely part of what we have been doing. And we have covered the ATAG, the accessibility, the authoring tool accessibility guidelines. We have looked into how much is provided according to those guidelines. And we also did tests and interviews with end users with disabilities who are working as web authors already. So yes, we have looked into it, but none of those two projects are actually solving this problem. Because the problem of accessibility in the kind of back office, or the editor environment, is in the actual editor itself. It's not in the templates, and it's also not in the features that we have created. It's kind of technically behind all of that. So we would need to have another project or in another context try to solve this in a better way, because you would still need to do workarounds. What we have been able to guarantee and secure and validate in these both projects are, of course, that whatever we recommend and provide is not adding accessibility barriers to this. And we also have in the guidelines for anyone who wants to implement or use the features, we have specific parts of the guidelines telling you what to avoid or make sure that you don't do this or that, because that could potentially hinder people with disabilities from using it. But it's important to say that we didn't solve that whole issue. It's a big one, and actually we did apply for a third project specifically for looking into that, but unfortunately we didn't get the funding. So as soon as we find another way of funding that, we will for sure try to do it, because that's something that I know that the authoring tool and the editors are very interested in solving. And to me personally, I think kind of the work environment for people with disabilities, that's one of the most key issues that we work with. So we will keep trying to solve that in different ways.
Thank you very much. There's actually been some questions in the chat just about where they can access the free features. So for those of you who are looking for the address, we've again posted that in the chat, so you can access these free features. Let's move on to the third question that we have here is, will authoring tools be covered by the upcoming accessibility legislation?
No, not the. It's not covered today, unfortunately. It was authoring tools were on the agenda when the trilogue was discussing the Web Accessibility Directive. So it was suggested at one time, but it didn't make it into the Web Accessibility Directive, and it's not specifically covered under the European Accessibility Act either. But I mean, indirectly, it is possible for organizations or organizations covered by any accessibility legislation to use the procurement directive and the standards and requirements for accessibility to make sure that the tools are actually delivering accessibility when used. And I think that is something that should be more in focus. I personally believe, not only because of these projects, but it's kind of crazy that we have tools that makes it even harder to create accessible content than it needs to be. And I mean, we have only looked at really the content management systems. So authoring tools are a much wider concept. Also learning management tools, and you could say social media are also authoring tools. I mean, we're all authors today. Everyone is creating content one way or another. Mm-hmm. So this is really a big issue, and I hope there will be more research projects and also more of the industry wanting to change a little bit the path onwards. And I know at least our cluster members, they're very interested in going on to keep the cluster going after the project ends. So that's very rewarding. And I hope more industry players will do that as well.
Just one thing to add to that, maybe. Can you hear me?
Yes, of course, okay. Peter.
So yeah, I just wanted, I was thinking of emphasizing that the Web Accessibility Directive obliges the public sector bodies to have their content accessible. So even if they buy an accessible website, then they still have to keep it accessible. So that's a very strong reason for investing into accessible authoring tools, because as Susanna mentioned before, a lot of actions that result in inaccessibility happen after the website is set up, and that's why it is part of the future, even if it's not in the legislation.
Yeah, and we do also see a lot of things happening. I think that many of the larger authoring tools are very aware that this is going to be, there is a demand already from the public sector authorities. So things are happening. It's much better now than it was just a couple of years ago. So at least we are moving in the right direction.
That's great, and thank you both there for the information. The next question is actually very, I think, of interest to all our participants here today, and that is, what can I do myself if I want to make use of the results of these projects that you've just presented?
Well, you can go to your boss and say that, hey, why are we working backwards? We should be having tools that support us instead, and that is really good for the whole world, but also it also makes sense from an efficiency point of view, I think, because otherwise you have your web authors providing content in an inaccessible way, and then the monitoring agency comes and say, no, don't do that, and then you need to remediate, and that takes a lot of time. So if you make sure that the next time you update or upgrade or procure a new tool, then make sure that you have as much built-in accessibility by default as possible. Then you don't need to train your web authors as much, and you don't need to first make the mistake and then remediate afterwards. I mean, that should make sense for anyone responsible for both for the compliance, but also for the economy of any organization, I think. And the more of you who are requiring this when you procure, I mean, to get the public sector is a huge, the purchasing power is absolutely enormous. So if all of you go out there and require authoring tools to provide accessibility features by default, ours or someone else's, I don't mind, but just require them to provide this, that will change the market. You have an enormous power there. So I would say, go to your boss, ask for it, make sure it happens, or go on strike, maybe.
So there you have it. So there's some takeaways there of direct action that you can do yourself following the presentation today. Is there anyone else would like to speak or raise their hand to launch a question to our panelists so far? We still obviously have some more content to cover, but it was just, if you have any more questions, there's any questions from the audience, additional questions? Okay, well, as you know, you can raise your hand throughout the webinar anyway. So just before we go, or while you're on a quick break, we're going to launch just a question for you to fill in, just so we can have a look at what our participants think about this question. And then we'll come back and look at the results after you've had a short break to grab a coffee and just stretch your legs a little bit. I would suggest that we
sharing.
Sorry?
Should I stop sharing when you launch the poll?
Yeah, no, that's fine, Susanna. I'll launch the poll, that's fine, and then when we're on the break, we can do that. So it's 22. I suggest that we come back at 10 to 2. So you've just got a short time just to grab a coffee, and then we'll come back. But first, I'm going to launch the question. So on your screens, you should have a poll that's popped up. And what we'd like to know from you is, does your current authoring tool that you use in your organization or you use personally offer accessibility by default features? So does your current authoring tool offer accessibility by default features? So we'd like to hear from you. It's a simple yes, no, or don't know poll. And then once you've had your coffee, we can come back and just have a look at the results and see what the audience, the experience of the audience with this type of tools and these types of features. Okay, so we'll come back in 8 minutes and we'll see you at 10 to 2 at 1:50. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you managed to grab that coffee, or at least have a stretch. It's important to have these regular breaks on the meetings. So thank you very much for responding to the poll that we launched. The results are actually quite interesting. We actually had 30% who said, 30% of the respondents who actually said yes, the current authoring tool does offer accessibility by default features. So that's actually impressive and possibly a little higher than was expected from the poll. So on that note, I would just like to see if anyone would like to share a brief example with the rest of the group. If anyone's brave enough just to share an example, then please raise your hand and we can hear from you.
Or just write it in the chat.
Yeah, or write it in the chat, whatever you're most comfortable with. So, but it would be great to hear from you. So yeah, if you just write that in the chat, then that's absolutely fine. For the no's, so the people who said no, the current authoring tool does not offer accessibility features by default. It was 44%, which is actually a little lower than we would have expected with the poll. However, it still does show the need for these types of features. So, and it just shows that those tools that don't offer these features for the users. And then we had 26% who said, I actually don't know. So there's obviously behind this, there will be different reasons, but it also coincides with the research from the two projects where the documentation on this is so scarce. So even if the features do exist, they're often very well hidden, so you don't know. But thank you very much for that. And yeah, again, we'll continue with the presentations now. However, please do share with us your example for those of you who said yes in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand. Okay. Let's move on to the second part of the workshop today, and I would like to hand the floor over to Peter Kemeny, who will be taking us a little deeper and showing us some examples of the user scenarios that were featured that were covered by this project. So Peter, please take it away.
Thank you, John. So we're thinking that after presenting the two projects, FEAT and Cluster, it would be useful to show how it all works in practice, or what is the direct benefit that web authors can get from solutions provided by these two projects. So I will talk about two features. First, I will talk about alternative text. Maybe this is the most frequently mentioned example. What it is about. It's about images, which we see very often. And which we like to see. Images are very important because on the one hand, around 25% of the population cannot read, so they get information from these images. But it is also important because, as we've heard, I think many times, that we get information through visual senses, like around 60% of all the information comes that way. So pictures are extremely useful. The problem is not having pictures. The problem is having pictures which are not accessible. What does that mean? Apart from pictures being important, pictures are also meaningful. They carry meaning. They have added value to the text we read, for example. Of course, there are images which are not which don't carry additional information. Those are decorations, which are still important. They can help with the layout, or they can make the text more nicer to read. But what we are talking about now is images which have a purpose of conveying information, so meaningful images in that sense. Because those pictures are meaningful, carry a meaning, you need alternative text. Why do you need alternative text? Because how do you know that you need alternative text? It's very simple. If you think that you take the picture away from your other content and something will be missing, then it means that you should make sure that the information on the picture is accessible for everybody. So the challenge here is to convey that meaning. So I'd like to do a little exercise here. You see this image for 3 minutes already, and when you looked at it, surely you had something in mind. So if you can put in the chat what alternative text you would put behind this image, how would you convey this meaning for somebody who cannot see it? If you can type something in quickly, then I can take it up. Okay, I have child playing happily with bubbles. Oh, it keeps coming. Audio description, young boy playing with bubbles, young boy playing with bubbles. Okay, soap bubbles a bit more concrete. The child uses soap bubble with O. Young boy laughing, very interesting, yes. So as you can see, fascinated child reaches out for soap bubbles. As you can see, there are many ways to describe this picture. If I would put alt text saying bubbles, only you feel that a lot of meaning would be lost. The important thing with alt text is that it is different for depending on the context. So it can be a child playing with bubbles. It can be a boy playing with bubbles if it's an article, for example, about gender stereotypes. Yeah. So that is it's important to have the proper alt text. And what is the solution we provide in the authoring tools, or these authoring tools provide? There are two venues for it. One is that it makes the alt text mandatory. It's easy to forget that you have to put an alternative text to an image. So the tool in the project actually calls your attention if there's no alt text, and it doesn't even let you publish the page if it has an image without an alternative text. The other feature is to have automated suggestions. And I would show an example how that works. The example is from the same presentation, it's the same picture. So there you can see that you can mark the picture as decorative, but you shouldn't. You can generate description. And here is what Office gave me, or gave us. It said a child playing with bubbles. So some of you had the same text. And it also says that description automatically generated with low confidence. This is a pretty good description, but sometimes it's not so good. But the interesting thing what we found is that even if the description is bad, it's still useful to provide an auto-generated text, because that would make you, the author, correct the bad alt text. And the other thing is, every time you correct the alt text, you teach the system. It's artificial intelligence based, and it is at this point heavily based on English alternative text. So every time you correct an alternative text in a different language where it is not so developed yet, every time you teach the system. And then in the end, if it works out well, it will be very easy to add alt text to an image, and the suggestions become better and better. So this was a simple example. The other one, a bit at this part at the end of the spectrum, is creating tables. When you look at the table, when we look at the table, what we do is we look at what is in the first row, what is in the first column. We see where the two meet, and then we know we can understand and interpret the data there. So an example is the game of tic-tac-toe. What happens if you don't know which row or which column you are in? Then you would just hear circle or X, which obviously doesn't mean a lot for you. And I have another example for you. It's a table of results in the Premier League. I hope it's close to many of your hearts. So it says what we see is Manchester City played 5 games, won 4, Manchester United the same, Chelsea 5 games, 3. What happens if the table, so when you see it, it's easy. What happens if you cannot see the table and, for example, a screen reader has to read what's written in there? Then probably what you would hear is Manchester City, Manchester United, Chelsea, Newcastle United, etc., etc. MP, W, D, L, F, A, D, P, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 4, 4, 3, 3, 2, 2, etc. So you can see that by not encoding the table properly, it's just complete gibberish. So that is actually the challenge, that what you see, what you do unconsciously when you look at the table, identify the row, identify the column, and then the cross section, that should happen when the machine reads the table. That means that, and I went technical on purpose here, that means that it should be encoded properly. If you do that on your own, this is kind of a checklist what you need to follow. So to mark tables correctly, you have to mark the upper row of the cells, you have to mark these as table headings, you have to do the same with the first column. Then to make your website coherent, you have to select the same font as you've used everywhere, the same text size, the same color of the text. You have to check that all the data in the table is coded using the correct code, and then it has a title using a caption element. It's a long list. So the idea is to make it easier, of course. So the templates provided give you built-in facility to create the right format and the right caption. Right caption is important to identify the table itself. It's a bit like the alt text for the images. And the format is to make the table understandable if you cannot see it. So here is an example of how it looks like. Should be, yep, there you go.
The table that Joachim tried to read hasn't been created correctly. It contains the following issues: a table heading that isn't coded as a caption, column headers that aren't coded as TH table headers, row headers that aren't coded as TH table headers, scope attributes which specify whether header cells are headers for columns or rows are missing for table headers.
So what happened there, what we could see there is that in the code, the first row and the first column was identified. All the table cells were identified as table cells. And so that way, a person, for example, a person who cannot see the screen can move between the cells in a way that they always know where they are, so they know for each cell which column header and row header belongs. So they can do the same exercise what we do very quickly when we look at a table. So these were the two examples from kind of the two spectrum, to opposite spectrum of all the things that can be done, that need to be done to make something accessible, and that can be done actually kind of automatically or with a lot of help from an authoring tool. And there are other features that Susanna presented it, but of course, for time, for the reasons of having limited time, we don't show them all. I hope it helped you to understand how big of a help automatic authoring tools, built-in accessibility authoring tools can be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, there for those hands-on examples of what the type of issues that the project has covered in itself, or both projects. Now we'd like to open the floor and hear from you. Any questions you may have, any doubts about the project, how this could affect you. So please use the question and answer box as we mentioned previously. We have had some questions that we can that have come in already, so we can go through those in the meantime. But please, please, we want to hear from you, so let us know. So the first question here, and I'd like to also invite Susanna here to respond to these where necessary, as this is kind of meant to be a panel discussion here. So the first question we have is, how important really is it to have an alt text? I work in an organization where, the organization where I work tries to add images, but the text is always the basis and the images are only a support or decorative. It may take a lot of time to get all staff to add alt text, and the risk is that they omit images altogether if the alt text becomes mandatory. So there's a question. I think the essence here is, how important is this really for our panelists?
Well, quickly, I shortly touched upon this, that it is important to have pictures. So you can describe a lot of things with text, but having pictures makes the text easier to read, easier to understand, and it makes our life richer. So you should really put pictures, and then you should really add text to them. That's the short answer from me, Susanna.
Yeah, I don't think that is really the question. Is what happens if we make them mandatory? So it's very interesting in the projects that the results we have from the surveys and also the interviews from web authors, the overwhelming majority of web authors from all different markets, and no matter what tools they have, they say, we would like this to be mandatory. Make as much mandatory as possible. And that is something we have discussed at length in both projects, because we know from experience of developing websites since more than 20 years that that can be a problem. It's not always the best way to force authors into one, even if, I mean, it sounds very relevant to say you can't publish it otherwise, but that may really be a barrier for everyone's working procedures, and it may be a problem, and it is true. It's a real problem that then if you make it too cumbersome, then people stop using images. So absolutely, it's a real risk, and that's why we also recommend it and have it in our both in the templates and feed and in the features in Cluster. It's kind of mandatory, but it's possible to overrule. You also need to be able to check it as decorative, of course, if it's an alt text that shouldn't have. Or it's an image that shouldn't have an alt text, but really it must be possible to overrule. And you can do that with in different ways, so that maybe you can't overrule it yourself, but you can send a message in the system to your sort of the head of communication that can overrule it or can write an alt text or whatever. So I think there is a balance absolutely with mandatory and sort of prompt or mandatory. But what was really surprising to us was that in this project, we have seen so much demand for mandatory requirements that we never thought. We thought that everyone would be like to sort of hold my hand, prompt me, support me, sort of, but we need the flexibility, but really it was totally the other way around. But I agree, that can be a problem, and we don't want people to have a negative feeling on content creation, and specifically not on illustrations, of course.
So some flexibility there is included. So that's good. Okay, we've got another question here again to you both. Following the logic behind the image alt text, what other content could use alt text, and does the tool support it?
Yeah, so the original description is alternative text for non-text elements. So anything that is visual could use an alt text, and a very good example is videos. It's the same as having an image, just many images in a row. So it's important to the same way describe what happens in a video shortly, if it has extra meaning. For example, if a video shows the procedure, how to go through a public procedure, then it is important to either have an alt text, or if it's more difficult, then it is important to have like a transcript of the video or a different way of describing the procedure. So in short, videos definitely need them, and both projects support having caption for having a description for videos.
Susanna, anything to add there?
No, I mean, the alternative text is kind of the standardized way of talking about this because it's in the success criteria of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So that is the sort of expert terminology we use. But in some, for example, in social media, this can sometimes be called something else, like image description, which I think is a bit difficult because that means something else to me. But just so everyone knows that maybe it's not, the functionality may not be called alternative text, but it's the same thing. We are describing what's in the image for the users that cannot see it. And this is being added in more and more software. So please use it because it is important. And as we could see from the participants, everyone is eager to write really beautiful alternative text, and there are many aspects of that. Of course, that's another. It's a full training, really, how to write good alt text. That's a 3-hour training. So,
yeah, and I think you touched on something interesting there with the use of social media. Public organisations that have their social media accounts, you know, how often do they really, to the images that they publish, how often is that accompanied by an alternative text? So.
Yeah, in Sweden more often than in other countries, because the Swedish national transposition of the Web Accessibility Directive actually goes beyond the minimum requirements. So if you are a public authority in Sweden, then you are required to use the built-in accessibility features of social media. But that is not in the directive, so that is a specific item in the Swedish legislation. But that's very interesting. It will be very interesting to measure that if we could do some kind of comprehensive study between member states after a while.
Yeah, thank you very much. So on this, the second half of Peter's presentation, you were looking at tables, and we've had a question from the audience here that says, how accessible are tables to people with cognitive disabilities? So Peter or Susanna, do we have any comments here?
I don't know. I can't see if Peter is breathing or wanting to start, but I can.
I leave it to you.
Okay, so it's another really good question. I mean, what is cognitive accessibility? We have so many different user needs and different ways of having experiencing cognitive barriers to content. But in general, I would say tables are making content more comprehensible and easier to understand, and also easier to connect, as long as you, at least as long as you can see the content, then it's sort of supporting. So I think in many ways it would be, you could argue that it's very good for people with cognitive disabilities. I'm sure we could find users that think tables are difficult, because that's always possible. But really, I think the most important thing is that the table is also visually good. So for example, the one that Peter used for the example of football games or whatever that is, some kind of sport, that wasn't a really good example because there were no lines. So it would be hard for me, having a bad eyesight, to really follow what is what. So it's also the graphical design of it, and the way it's presented is also very important. And of course, how you describe what the different columns are. If you're using abbreviations, then that will be difficult. So there are many aspects of the tables that are not only the technical parts that the screen reader should be able to interpret the table in the right way, but I would say generally tables are good. It's a good way to present content that are suitable for tables, but of course you need to explain what's in the table and how it should be read if it's very complex. There are extremely complex tables as well. I think I'm only answering like a politician today. I'm sorry about the questions are clever.
I'm sure that the audience, if they're not happy, will get back to us. If they
yeah. Maybe to add to that, there are very complex tables, but I think whenever it's possible, it's useful for everybody's sake to try to make them more simple. So if you have the option to create 2 tables and making it more understandable, then it would create cognitive ease for everybody.
Thanks, Peter. And on that note, I'm going to use that as a segue to our next question, which is also about tables here. And that's, what if I use a table to help formatting my text? Do I need to make that accessible, and can the tool handle it?
So first of all, if possible, don't. As the general advice is that you should use tables first of all for data that is meant for tables. And I understand how appealing it is to use tables to format text, but these days authoring tools provide very good ways of, and a lot of flexibility to put your text wherever it needs to be. So it is better to avoid using tables for layout or for layout reasons. It is possible, and it has another set of accessibility requirements, but I would say that better not to do it.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that. Susanna, do you have anything to add there, or?
No, I could go on forever about tables, but I think that's absolutely enough for the.
And I would let you, but we're quite tight on time today, so that's not possible. We do have another. We've got quite a few questions coming in. So one is, how do you implement automated testing? Which tools do you use?
So thank you for that question. We don't recommend any tools in these projects, and we, as Funka, we don't recommend tools either, because we don't want to sort of drive the market in one direction. So in these, in the features, we recommend how to set up the testing and how to present the results. And we have done a lot of testing around user testing on the testing. This is becoming kind of meta, but we have some recommendations on how you present the results. For example, that you should be able to filter so that the web authors get kind of their issues and the technicians, the developers get theirs, and so on. And also on a little bit on how this is presented, how much details you need, and so on. So we have a lot of recommendations around the testing procedures, but we haven't implemented a specific tool. There are many different tools out there, and they kind of share the same problems. I think there are about 150 or so tools out in the market, and it's not in the scope of our projects to test them and say which one is better than the other. But the idea is that with the setup of recommendations of features that we are presenting, then the tool producer or tool provider could choose either a licensed product or an open source product and put that into their tool. We do not expect any one of them to actually develop their own testing methodology, but there are tool makers that are creating their own testing technologies inside of their tools as well. We had actually 2 of our cluster members have done that, but our recommendation is to use one of the ones that are out there already and make sure that they are implemented in the right way. So what we have done is really the recommendations on how to present it and how to make sure that the author can use it in a good way. What we want to avoid is that you create your content here one time and then you need to publish it first, and then you go somewhere else to another software or another add-on in your browser or whatever, and then you do the testing, and then you need to go back to your authoring tool and do the remediation. That's not going to work. So that's why we want to have the testing inside of the tool instead. And again, we have testing in many different levels. So I think the most interesting one to me personally is the one that is working a little bit like a spell checker. So it's actually testing it's telling you if you are making any accessibility mistakes as you are typing your content. That's really helpful. So we hope for more development and implementation in that direction.
Thank you very much there, Susanna. We have another question on tables. A lot of interest in the second part there of Peter's presentation. And this question is, can multi-dimensional tables be accessible? And again, how does the tool handle this?
So the tools can handle it to a certain extent. It is possible to make multidimensional tables accessible, but as mentioned, it is better to limit it to a reasonable extent. And there's another thing which is not about the tools, but some screen readers might not be able to handle multiple headers. So like the double header row. So it is better to avoid for that reason, even if your authoring tool, even if your authoring tool can handle it.
Thanks, Peter.
Not only screen readers, but all sorts of assistive technology, I would say, have problems, and also people have problems with this.
Yeah, if there's any other final questions, please do raise your hand or write them in the Q&A box. We have received a question that's not directly related to Peter's presentation, but it was launched a little bit earlier, and that is, I was wondering if you were able to clarify if WCAG 2.2 is the most updated guidelines for writing on the web. It used to be 2.1 until the 21st of May. Is that correct?
No. The 2.2 version that is published here in May is a working draft, so it's not a stable standard yet. And I don't know where the person asking this question is coming from, but in Europe we are, I mean, everyone is of course welcome to use any standard for anything, but if you look at the legislation, we are pointing to the EN standard, so the European standard 301549, and that one is still pointing to 2.1. So it depends on where you are in the world, but really in Europe it's the EN standard, and that we are still using the 2.1. But please be aware that 2.2 is still a working draft. So whenever you would like to start using it, even if it's not connected to the legislation, then my recommendation would be to, start looking at it, absolutely, and you can learn a lot from that. But I wouldn't start recommending it or using it really in real life until it's a stable standard.
Thanks, Susanna. So it's just a kind of a last chance now for anyone. If you have any questions, please do raise your hand. We've got 6 minutes left. We've got one more slide to share with you, just some takeaways from the event today. But this is your chance now.
Maybe we could just say something about the standards. So what will happen after? So even the EN, this is technical, I know, but it is important. So even the European standard, the EN standard, also has new versions after the one that is used as a presumed conformance for the minimum requirements of the Web Accessibility Directive. So after the summer, as far as we know, the European Commission will publish the EN 301549 version 3.1 in the official journal, which is the way that the Commission is harmonizing standards, which means that then that standard will be, or that version of the standard will be the one used for presumed conformance to the minimum requirements of the Web Accessibility Directive. That is something else than the WCAG 2.2, and that may come later, but it's just updating for the EN standard. And we will have in the month of June, there will be launched a new mandate, which is, well, probably there will be launched a mandate for the standardization bodies to restart the work, so to speak, with the EN standard or any other standard that is needed to support the European Accessibility Act, because the next step in the European legislation on accessibility, which is covering specific products and services in the commercial sector, for that legislation, we will need an updated EN standard and or other standards to cover both products and services accessibility. So there will be a lot of things happening in the European level standardization in the upcoming year or years, but we don't know exactly how that will evolve until we get the mandate. And I say we now, but we, the society, and also the standardization bodies where I'm engaged, but we are still waiting for the mandate. So, but look out for new versions of the standards and make sure that you are finding the right one. Please reach out if this is very difficult to understand. We do get a lot of questions and we're always happy to answer them, of course. There's a lot of numbers and long terms to keep in mind.
Thanks, Susanna, for some great advice there. We've actually just heard back from the person who asked the question about the previous question about the WCAG, and they said that they're based in Ireland, so it's very relevant to them, so thank you. I'm not sure whether just very quickly, either of you want to make any comments on the examples that were shared with us in the chat about the experiences of tools that do include the features that we've discussed. If there's anything you would like to mention there. One of our respondents just mentioned that the EpiServer installation, they have to add alt text in both Swedish and English to be able to publish images.
Very good. Yeah.
And then another respondent just mentioned that there's a couple of editors in use, but most editors guide with the writing of the alternative text description for images. So, and they don't let you pass without a description or marking the image as a decoration. So just some examples there from the audience of their daily experience with the tools that they're using. So thank you very much for sharing. So
if I just may add, so the EpiServer example is clearly that the supplier or the procurer has demanded this. I mean, the organization has said we want this, or the supplier has offered it as part of their specific offering, because this is not included in the kind of standard setup of EpiServer. So this means that somebody actually thought something and did something good. So that requires either the organization who procures the system or the supplier that provides the system to know about accessibility. So that's fine, and I'm happy to hear that it exists, but what we try to do with the template is to make sure that the supplier do not have to understand accessibility and the web authors neither need to understand accessibility, and still it would be there by default. That's kind of the essence of this. And it's also typical that we get 2 examples and both has to do with alt texts.
Okay, I think we're running out of time very quickly. So Susanna, I'd like to hand over to you for the wrap up and the conclusions from the workshop. So thank you very much.
And I have 0 minutes to do that. Thank you, John. I'm not sure. Yeah, thank you. So just very quickly to let you go on with your afternoon. If you can just click, Peter, I can't remember what I have on this. Yeah, so what you can do now before we will provide you with the templates and the features here, because they are not really 100% ready yet. So you need to survive from today until we really provide this to you. Then please make sure that you have the right tool. I mean, have a look at your authoring tool. This now we are showing something else. Thank you. So have a look at the tool that you use, and not only the authoring tool, but also the automatic testing tools or other kind of publishing mechanisms that you use, whatever tools you use to create PDFs and so on. Make sure that you are critical to the tools and see if you can do something to update them or to require your supplier to provide something that is better for you. Because as a web author, you are supposed to get the support you need to create accessible content. And then to make this happen, of course, you need to go to the person who has the budget and really make sure that he or she understands that this is important. And I really think there is a return on investment here. And if you just explain how much training is needed and how much extra work you put into doing the remediation and controlling, then the management will also buy into this. And then that means that at least the next generation authoring tools that you procure will be better if you do post these requirements. Also important is to always make sure that accessibility is part of your daily work. This can't be just a project that you do. Today we work or this year we work with accessibility, and next year we work with gender issues or safety or whatever. That won't work. We need to make sure that accessibility is part of everything we do. We build it into our processes and make it business as usual. Also, even if you have sort of the hat of the accessibility expert in your organization, you are not alone. Accessibility is always the responsibility of the whole team. So you can't have just one person responsible for everything that has to do with accessibility, because it's such a long chain of things. It's technology, it's design, it's UX, it's content, it's the documents, it's procurement, it's project management, it's everything. So it's the responsibility of the whole team. Make sure that everyone knows that and that they are aware of their responsibility when it comes to accessibility. And if you feel alone, then please join the International Association of Accessibility Experts, because they are a member organization that provides you with friends and people you can reach out to. It's also, of course, important not to rely always on experts. We are happy to help, but if you don't build your internal competence, then you will not be successful. We see that very, very clearly in our clients. The one that succeed with accessibility, they have built their internal testing processes and control mechanisms and internal competence. It will be too costly and resource demanding, and also not sustainable if you need to call an expert every time you want to do something. So please make sure to build your internal competence when it comes to accessibility. And if you fulfill all these bullet points, then everyone will live happily ever after, and the world will be more accessible. So good luck, and thank you for joining us today. And we will now finalize this. We also got a question about when we will publish this video on the Funka website. And that I think will happen either later today or tomorrow morning. But we will send out a link to everyone that participated today. With the link, of course, to the recording as well, yeah, so you can find it there. And I can't promise exactly which time it will be published, but as soon as we have the time to do it. Thank you very much, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any more questions. Bye bye.